That gives me fantastic. Well, yes, thank you very much for that introduction, and thank you everyone for having me along this evening. I'm going to quickly flick on into my slides here, hopefully. There we go. Lynn, are you comfortable that you've covered off the welcome?
Yes, sorry, I forgot to flick through those PPT, but...
That's quite all right. You did it so well. So what I'll try and do with my presentation is talk for roughly 30 minutes or so, and we've got a bit of a poll in the middle of the talk so that I can gauge some priorities, and I'll try and share some stories and we can have some conversations between us on our priority topics. So we'll see how that goes. We'll do it with a Slido poll, and I hope that what we'll then be able to do is to spend some time having a conversation at the end with some Q&A, and you bringing your stories into the session as well.
Very good.
Oh, good. All right, it's clicking a little bit slowly, so this might advance a bit quickly. So yeah, do feel free, please, to take notes. Drop questions into the question box if they come to you as we go along. I'll either answer them at the time or we'll collect them and answer them at the end, and we'll do the Slido polls. I'll give you my LinkedIn profile at the end. So in terms of Slido, this is the code that we're using here, and there's a link that's just been posted into the Q&A as well. So I'll give you a few minutes just to scan that and join. And if I change slide before you've managed to scan it, the link is in the chat box. Okay. So what did I want to talk with you about tonight? Stakeholders, the people that we work with, and how do we make the best impact on them when we're working, particularly as business analysts. And so I thought I'd share some of the things that I've learned over my career and give us an opportunity for you to share the things that, that you've discovered as well. So in terms of structuring this talk, the first thing I want to do is to just get us some positioning and context so that we feel like we're all talking the same language, and make sure that we're covering the right ground. And then start to say, what's our desire? What is it that we want when we work with stakeholders? Share some thinking on that. So that's all well and good, but what sort of problems can make that hard? And then when we think about the problems that make things hard, what can we do about it? And I've come up with some suggestions that I think might be of interest, and we'll go through those in priority order so that we've got some time for some Q&A at the end. And then maybe if you're feeling brave, you might want to share some reflections from the talk and maybe some ideas of what you want to do starting tomorrow, or maybe next week if you want more time to think. So hopefully that's all good. Do please type in a question or shout out if you want to ask me some questions when I'm talking. So Lynn, thank you very much for introducing them. That's me there with a red circle around my head, not all the time, just in that picture. And my job as Chief Impact Officer is to make sure that our people are impact players, that they get outcomes for themselves, for their colleagues, and for our clients. And Redvespa, we're based in Wellington, but we also have offices in Auckland and Christchurch. And we're a consultancy with our roots and our heart in business analysis. But we've also got lots of people who've come from different backgrounds. So we have quite a lot of diversity in our thinking. And we also do broader consulting and bits and pieces of project management to help us deliver our projects. But fundamentally, we're a business analysis professional services consultancy. And I've added that little bit at the bottom about real people solving problems, because what we try to do is to really humanize how we do business analysis, because it can be very analytical, it can be very factual, but at the heart of the day, we're dealing with people. In terms of my career, I've been working in this space for about 30 years. I started as a localization engineer, which is a software developer that works with translating software. And I've been a team leader. I've had startups. I've worked as a technical manager. I've worked as a sales manager. What else have I done? I've worked with governments, with big companies, with small companies, and not-for-profits as well. So I've covered quite a lot of work. And I actually, I have been a business analyst as well, by the way. But like many of you, I think I came quite late into business analysis. So it wasn't my first career, but I've really enjoyed the journey in. So I've tried to think a bit about my journey to see if there's some stories that I can share with you. So hopefully that's a wee bit of an introduction as to who I am and where I come from. Actually, another little point that might be of interest. So I come from Scotland originally, but I lived in England for 20 years and I've lived in New Zealand for 5 years. So I have seen some cultural changes in the different types of business and stakeholders that I work with as well, which is quite an interesting reflection. So I suppose we should probably start with our context of saying, who are stakeholders and what are they and what sort of mysterious beasts are stakeholders. I think a really nice, simple definition of a stakeholder is a person with a vested interest. And that's in whatever it is you're doing, whether you're helping them make a decision or designing a new process or business or technical requirements or whatever activity you're in. Now, the reason that I really like this definition, particularly the first line, is it reminds us that first off, stakeholders are people. They're not robots. They're complicated. They have good days and they have bad days. Now, vested interest is an interesting one to unpack. So vested comes from the same root as investment. So someone is making an investment. So they're investing their time with you or their dollars or their reputation. They're making some sort of commitment and probably want to see some sort of return. And that's the interest part of it. So what is a stakeholder interested in? Are they interested in outcomes or prestige or financial returns? So even just with this really simple definition, we can see that stakeholders, there can be a lot of complexity there. And another thing with stakeholders is that their interest in working with you can be constructive. You hope it is, but it's not always. And you would hope that a stakeholder is informed, but sometimes they're not. Sometimes they don't know the answers any more than you do. And our job as a business analyst is to try and help them navigate that. So vested interests, who's got what agenda? What are they trying to get out of the project or the meeting that you're in or the conversation that you're having or the email? So hopefully that makes sense as a definition. Any comments or questions at this stage? We all good? Awesome. So let's do a little Slido poll then. So this is really to help me understand your viewpoints here. So if you met a stranger and you had to tell them, what does a stakeholder get from talking to a business analyst? What words might you use? And let's maybe take a couple of minutes just to type in some words into the Slido question, and we'll get a bit of a word cloud. And what that helps me do is just make sure that I can talk to the points that interest you. So we're at 8:17 now, so let's go for 8:19. And there's no right or wrong answer here, by the way. This really is me getting to know you. Oh, we're going to get on so well, team. I love these, great suggestions. Yep. This is super, yeah. Great, we'll give it one more minute, I think. I think there's a strong winner there, isn't there? Of course, there's quite an interesting philosophical point about what clarity actually is. Now that's interesting, yeah. Great. That's fine. We'll probably, if you finish off any last typing that you're doing, really, really interesting. So obviously the two big ones are clarity and solution. So I'm going to try and come back to those as we weave through the conversation. So thank you very much for sharing your thoughts there. And lots of really good, positive, constructive sides, and translation's another big one. Yeah. Just before we go further, it feels like there's in the story structure that we're taught as children to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. I think our 3 points here are a really nice story about how a business analyst helps a stakeholder. In the beginning, we help create clarity, and in the middle, we help translate that into what could be and what should be, and then solution is the outcome, it's the end. So that's a really nice illustration of the story. Thank you for sharing that. Right, let's move on. So our positioning, clarity and confidence. Look at that, two of the big words that you picked out there in the word cloud. I think personally that the biggest thing that we can do for a stakeholder is bring them that clarity and confidence, because normally a stakeholder is either trying to understand something, or they're trying to make a decision on how they deal with a situation or what they do with options, and the solution is the output of that. As business analysts, we'll quite often say, don't jump to a solution. It can be quite easy to listen to what someone is saying and say, I know what you need X. And sometimes that's right, and sometimes it's not. And so that's why, for me, the clarity and the confidence lead the solution. Again, no right or wrong. This is just my thinking here. How many folks have seen the BABOK, the BA Body of Knowledge? Big, thick orange book, about 50 mil thick. Yeah, I'm seeing a few nods. It's fantastic. It's all of the tools of our trade, the templates, the ways of doing our work. And to me, that's all in service of creating this clarity and confidence. That's why the tools exist. They don't exist just on their own. They're things that help us work with our stakeholders. I mentioned right at the start that people are not robots, and we can see sometimes the facts and the logic of a situation, and sometimes stakeholders like that, and sometimes they don't. So what is clarity for me might not be clarity for someone else. I don't know whether anyone else has been in that situation as well, where it's obvious to you, but not everyone sees it the same way. Binary versus trialectic. Binary is yes or no, it's true or it's false. Trialectic is the shades of grey in the middle. And an example of this might be, what's the right option to choose for a software package? Now, if I've got stakeholders of the chief finance officer, the chief information security officer, the chief executive officer, and so on, they may all have different views of what's the right answer. And as an analyst, as a business analyst, we've got to try and navigate that conversation without annoying all of the stakeholders all at the same time, in the same way. Oops. So I think the crux of what we're looking at here is that good stakeholder engagement is about getting inside the heads of our stakeholders as people, not just as their role. It's easy to see, and I've just done it there when I talked about chief finance officers and chief information security officers, to see them as a persona. But of course, there's a range of different types of people in each one of those roles. So it can be easy to maybe go into a meeting or into a workshop or into an interview with one particular mindset because we're talking to a CFO, a chief financial officer, but they might be a completely different sort of person. So we just need to check our views as well, I think. Let's move on. There we go. So if that's the situation, if we assume that's the case, what is it that we want? For me, what I'm trying to do when I work with stakeholders is try and get to their truth. And what I mean by that is, let's get some more words up. There we go. Bring that true clarity. We need to find out what's really meant or what's really needed, and not what the stakeholder in front of us wants to hear or what we think they want to hear. Our job is to tell the truth, not to make people feel comfortable necessarily. Ultimately, we want them to be more than comfortable. We want them to be happy. But sometimes to get there, we have to challenge them quite hard. I think we all want to do a good job as business analysts, but we're walking into a bit of a minefield sometimes, because different roles, different people have different priorities. Priorities can change depending on the time of the financial month, the financial year. There can be some politics around what we're doing, where people have got different agendas that are important, and sometimes they can share information with us and sometimes they can't. And then there's positioning as well. I don't know whether, have any of you been in a situation where a stakeholder sits back and folds their arms and says, no, we don't need to change, everything's working fine, I don't know why you're here, and I don't know why you're wasting my time with this conversation. And so that's one type of positioning. Another one might be, well, you know, we really want to do this, we don't care what the rest of the business is saying, we're going to make this happen. And so these are positions that people take, and we have to change the way that we have conversations with people depending on that. I mentioned a couple of times, you know, understanding the person, and you know, that does come down to the trust and the rapport that you build with people. We're going to be asking people some quite tough questions, and we're going to keep asking them questions, and we're going to ask them to think. And so if they don't trust us, they won't give us the support and the information that we need. So it's quite a, I think, quite a privilege that we have as business analysts to talk to people about what they really want. And so for me, it should never be a tick box type of job, a business analyst. It's such an important role for what really matters to people. And my last little observation in terms of what we want around getting to the truth is, if you've had other jobs before you've been a BA, you've probably got most of these skills anyway. It's just applying them in our context of understanding requirements and needs and processes and business and options. So there'll be a lot in your toolbox already that you can reuse. So if that's what we want, why can we not just have it? And I think that's because people are hard. People have good days and bad days, and some people want to help us and some don't, and some are distracted by stuff that's happening, and some haven't had enough coffee yet, and all sorts of things like that. And I mentioned again, you know, we keep asking questions. We say to people, why? And why do you want that? And why does it happen that way? And they go, I don't know. Stop, what's with all the questions? And so sometimes, you know, when we're asking and really probing deeply, there's a way of us structuring our conversations and turning a challenge into a really curious exploration. So I think curiosity is a massive asset for a business analyst, and real curiosity where you care. Again, this is something I was thinking that, you know, when I've been working with stakeholders, particularly senior ones, they know, either by looking at their numbers and reports or instinctively, they know that something has to change. They say, look, Keith, this has to be better. We must make these improvements for a benefit of our people or our customers or our planet. And you say, great, what do you think needs to change? And they say, I don't know. I know it just needs to be better. And so even at that level, people can sometimes not know exactly what they want. Now, again, sometimes they're really clear and they say, we must do this, we must do this, and we must do this. That's fantastic. You can just challenge them quite quickly to say, are you sure? But a lot of the time, if people can't say or won't say what they truly need, then we're going to have to try and work with them to dig into that. And often people will tell you what they want, and they'll very confidently and clearly tell you what they want, but that doesn't necessarily mean that's what they need. And that difference between want and need can be quite challenging to navigate, because what people need, they might not want to hear. They might be so glad that you told them that, but for other people, it might challenge their knowledge or their prestige or their position. And depending on when you have that conversation with them, it can make them feel bigger or smaller. So complicated people. Now this point here is, I was trying to think of a better way to put it, but I thought I'm just going to explain, I think, what I mean by this. All of these skills get better with practice, and just being in the situations where you've got to navigate politics and priorities and positioning. And you can do a lot of learning by reading, and I'm going to share some book ideas with you, and through training and role play and things like that. And it comes down to personas again as well. If you're in this situation with that persona, you can probably do this 80% of the time. It'll work. And so you can build up some really good skills about how you deal with situations. But at the end of the day, when you really need them, the sample size is one. It's the person who's right in front of you who might be in the 80% of they react well if you do this, or they might be one of the 20% who doesn't react well. So it's difficult with complete certainty to get things right with stakeholder engagement. So I would encourage you to kind of look and observe and learn and think, is this working or not? And be ready to change and use your own, trust your instinct and your experience if you feel you need to change things. So basically, anything that I'm going to tell you, feel free to use or just abandon it for something that you know will work better. Just keep the eyes and the ears going. Your business analyst will be really good at doing that. I guess the key point here is that, and there's a cultural aspect to this as well, that people want to be validated. They want to have a voice. They want to feel heard or be seen, but they don't necessarily enjoy the confrontation. And particularly in group settings, that can be quite interesting to achieve. Sometimes you can get a person who will behave one way in a one-to-one interview, and in a group setting they'll behave in a different way, and sometimes that gives us clues about what type of stakeholder they are or what pressures they feel internally. So I'm sorry, I've been doing a lot of talking here, but I like this stuff. Oops, yep. So our next Slido poll. What I'd be interested in is the priority that you would have for these different areas of stakeholder engagement. So I've alluded to some of these points when I've been talking, and I'm just really interested to know which are the top three for each of you that you would like to talk about a little bit more. And what we'll then do is I can go through them in priority order so that we cover those off. So if we maybe take a couple of minutes, so we're at 8:31, so maybe 8:33. Very exciting, isn't it, watching it all change? Great. So we've got another minute. And we may well manage to get through all of them, but I just thought if I do them in the right order, then we can stop and ask questions and so on. Great.
So I got a question on this option. So what's the difference between influencing and impacting, or having an impact? What's the difference between these two?
Yeah, really good question. Yeah. So having an impact, I think, is about delivering an outcome. So getting to that end result and taking action, whereas influencing and getting buy-in might just be to get someone to believe in you, to trust you, and to take the point of view that you're presenting to them.
Thank you.
My pleasure. Great question. Right, so that's 8:33, so let's just note down that order. So we've got influencing is number one, understanding behaviours is 2, impact is 3, ambiguity 4, and diffusing Great. So the way that I've structured the rest of the slides is I've got a slide for each one of these, and I'm just going to have to go through them in a slightly different order to the way that I've presented them, so that we can talk through them in order. So just bear with me, and we'll go through those. Thank you once again for sharing your views. So something I wanted to leave you with in these slides is a bit of a toolkit that you can adopt or you can explore for addressing the blockers and the opportunities in all these different areas. So from the poll that we did there, so influencing was number one. So we're going to talk about pitching skills. So almost like you were a startup and doing a pitching. Number two was behaviours. So we'll talk a little bit about some cultural models that might explain how people behave and what you can do about it as a business analyst. Number three was impact. So I'll introduce you to impact players, which is a model by Liz Wiseman. Number four was ambiguity. So we'll talk about situational awareness. Number five was rapport. So which one was that? That's the active listening. So yeah, let's have a wee talk about how do you listen really well. Great skill for us to have as BAs and just as people in general, actually. And then the last one was diffusing. So if we get time, we'll have a look at something called crucial conversations. At some point in your BA career, if you haven't seen it already, you will definitely be facing a crucial conversation. So I'll maybe see if I can show you that one as well. Great. So let's just quickly flick on to influencing. Oops, there we go. Right. So I'm going to introduce a book and a canvas here to you. And the inspiration for these is my own personal experience in sales-facing roles and in having my own startups and having to pitch for investment and convince some very, very skeptical stakeholders that it was worth having a conversation with me. So although these are not standard BA tools, I think they're really worth having an investigate of. So awesome, thank you for popping the link in there. Crossing the Chasm is quite old now. It's actually about 25 years old, written by an author called Geoffrey A. Moore. And the chasm that he talks to is that gulf between the green and the blue parts of the normal distribution curve here. And Crossing the Chasm is all about selling new products to people who don't know about them yet. And the chasm is the difference between the early adopters who will buy anything new and the early majority, the blues, who will make you your first bit of money so you can grow your business. So that's why this book came about. And the thing that I took from that to help me as a business analyst is something called the 6-line story. And the 6-line story is a form of elevator pitch like you might see on Dragon's Den or Shark Tank, where entrepreneurs try and pitch for investment. And the 6-line story, as the name suggests, is 6 short lines that really, really narrow down the things that people need to know to be convinced. And an example of that, and if you've done user stories, you'll probably recognize this, but user stories came after Crossing the Chasm. So here's an example 6-line story. So it starts with the first line is as a particular audience. So it might be as people entering or growing their BA skills. With a pain, this line 2 is with the pain or with the opportunity that we want to grow our skills as a peer group. Line 3 says, we offer BA career meetup, a thing. And line 4 says, which brings these benefits. So it gives you a structured way of interacting with one another and with guest speakers. Line 5 says, unlike the alternative. Line 6 says, we differentiate by doing this. So unlike, I don't know, your university alumni group, we differentiate by bringing people from across a whole range of different areas. So the short version of that is, as BAs looking to grow our BA skills, we offer the BA Career Meetup, which means that you can cross-pollinate your ideas. Unlike your alumni society, we have a more diverse pool of people. And so you can very quickly brainstorm through some ways of telling this story that identify an audience. So is my stakeholder in this audience? If they're not, then they're not going to listen to me. So how can I make it about them? There's the pain or the opportunity. What is it that matters to them? You know, we talked about that vested interest. So that stakeholder with that vested interest, that's your first 2 lines of the story. Then there's the thing that you're trying to do with them, maybe the interview that you're pitching to them, that you want them to interact with you, or the document that you want them to review, or something like that, the activity. And then the what's in it for them is the 4th line. So this is why I think it's important to get inside the heads of your stakeholder, because you're understanding their pain and their motivators. And the audience is important so that they see themselves in the story. Now, the last thing about the 6-line story is the bit that often gets forgotten, which is the unlike such and such. We differentiate by doing this. Now, that's a really important part for startups, because they have to convince venture capitalists why they're different. So you might ask, why does that matter if we're business analysts about the difference? And I think where it's really powerful is if you're trying to get someone to understand something new, maybe have a type of conversation they haven't had before. The natural thing to do is to try and explain it to them, so that you force the logic on them, and you use the words and you draw pictures and things to tell them what it is. Sometimes it's easier to tell people what it's not. Because when you're trying to explain things, people are trying to fit it into their mental models that they've got just now. So their brains, all their cognitive capacity is used up to try and fit what you're saying into their world. So when you tell someone this is nothing like what you've seen before, it stops them, or it helps them stop trying to do that. So an example might be, you know, when you have to jump on a train or a bus or drive for half an hour and go to a meeting room somewhere in the city so that you can network with people. Well, this isn't that. This is online so that you can do it from anywhere. Now, obviously, I'm using a really simple, basic example that we're all involved in. But if it was something like an ERP system or a CRM system, you might say to someone, you know how at the moment you have to download stuff from the CRM into Excel, and then you have to manually edit it and then update it into the invoicing system. Well, forget that. What we're going to do is integrate them and pull them together into one system. So instead of having to try and explain integration, you're just saying to people, look, it's not that split and separation. And sometimes people will react to you and say, oh, that's fantastic. You know, if you could take that pain away from me, that would be wonderful. And it helps to explore a situation from another angle. So that was a very long way of explaining a 6-line story, but those 6 lines, and try and only write, maybe 5, 10, 15 words on each line at most, is well worth a try, just to think, how do I get my message across about why this matters to these people? So 6-line story, really good. Now, anyone heard of the business model canvas from Strategyzer? I've got 1 or 2 nods. So Strategyzer, they are a company from the Netherlands and Europe, and Alex Osterwalder, his university thesis was on this thing called the business model canvas, and there's a tiny, tiny version of it just here, if you can see my mouse pointer. And as the name suggests, what it's designed to do is to help businesses unpack all of the things they've got to think about when they start a new business unit. So the market, the consumers, the actual financial model, the logistics, and all that sort of stuff, so that you can decompose. Awesome, thank you. Yeah, the links just popped up. Thanks, Sophie. Now, when you extract a couple of those boxes, you end up with this thing called the value proposition canvas. And what the value proposition canvas says is, if I want to get someone to buy into my thing, what I need to understand is their job to be done here on the extreme right-hand side. Now, that's putting it into customer language and saying, you want to do this job, what pains and gains are you facing? So what could cause a problem for that? What would create benefits for you? Because quite often we'll ask people how they want a process to run or what functional requirements they want in a system. So people will tell us what they're comfortable with or what they can think through or what they think they can tell us to make us go away quickly because they've got other things to do. So if we ask about functions and requirements, we'll often miss some of the important stuff that people really need. Instead, if you start with a job to be done, and jobs to be done was Tony Ulwick and his company's Strategin, so strategy, but finishing with a letter N for November. He's seen as the father of jobs to be done. So well worth digging into Tony Ulwick's work. And what he says with that is that if you ask people about the job they're trying to do, they'll tell you about the outcomes and the struggles towards getting there. And then it's our job as the consultant or as the analyst to try and work out what the requirements are behind that. And it sounds really simple, but it's deceptively powerful to ask people, what are you actually trying to achieve here? So instead of saying, look, I want to talk to you about the integration requirements for CRM and invoicing system, you might say to them, when you think about customers and invoicing, what are you trying to do? And they'll give you a big picture view of the job to be done. And then you can pick that apart with little bits and you can say, what is it that you're trying to gain from that? Just pick the top 3 to 5 things or 10 things. And what is it that gets in the way of doing that job? And it's a really good way to unpack with the users, with the stakeholders' words, what it is that they really need. And that's another thing actually that's important is capturing stakeholders' words and language, because we need to reflect back to them in their language so that they know that we've heard them. So even if you want to say, great, so you talked about integration. Well, I call it integration, but you talked about plugging the systems in together. Even just that little subtlety of using the language back to people will help with the rapport building. Now, that gives you your right-hand side with the circle here. And then what you do is on the left-hand side, you look at the product or service that you've got or that you're developing or the process that you're doing or the meeting that you need to hold. And you just say, how could I explain this in a way that shows how it creates some gain for the stakeholder? So you said you wanted it in simple language. Well, actually, we could do this in words of one syllable. Do you want me to write you up a table, a glossary of some of the key things here? Great, yeah, we can do that. And on the other side is the pain relievers. So you told me that it takes 3 days at the end of every month just to get the invoices corrected. What if we could do that automatically? How much of a difference would that make? And so what you can start to do is to be guided by the stakeholders to what they need. And of course, what happens when you do that and you talk their language and you use the terms and the priorities that they deal with, is they look across you at the table and they think to themselves, you really understand me. I like what you've got to say. And even if you're challenging someone and saying, well, are you sure that's a gain that you want to have? Tell me how that fits with your job to be done. You've now got a structure where you can challenge the thinking by asking really good questions about what it is that they need to do and what they want. So that's my slightly left field view of how you can use startup thinking to help you get stakeholders on board. So I might take a wee time out for a second and just, are there any questions or anything that wasn't clear about what I said with that one? Because this was our top priority, so I want to make sure that it was useful. Feel free to type a question in or to pop a hand up, and we'll give it another 15, 20 seconds. That's great. Is this type of information being useful? A thumbs up for yes, thumbs down for no, thumb in the middle for not sure. Cool, good, right. Excellent. I'm just making sure that. I mean, I'm quite happy to talk about this all night, but if it's not useful, then that's great. Good. That's smashing. Well, thank you very much for letting me know that. That's what I was hoping we would find out. So the next thing was behaviours. So what did I do for behaviours? Let's just go quickly back up to this one. One more. Come on, click. My keyboard is not always awake. There we go. Hopefully it will stay here. Good. Look, for each of these slides, I've put a book up in the top right-hand corner. I think one of them is a web link. So if you want to do a bit of deeper reading, these are the inspirations that I've leaned upon. And with behaviours, I wanted to pay some homage to a person called Michael Henderson, who runs a business called Cultures at Work. And he ran a culturing program with us here at Redvespa to help us understand much more about what culture looks like. And it's huge, it's massive, but I wanted to share a couple of tools with you that might be useful for you as business analysts. And Michael's well worth talking to for your business if you want to do more. So the first one is the triangle on the left, and the bit I'm going to home in on is the behaviours part. So there's a whole stack of things that work together within a culture. But let's say, what's an example I can think of? Right. So you talk to the chief marketing officer of an organization, and they behave in a certain way. They're really enthusiastic for the things that you're talking about. They love the idea of the changes that you're specking out with them. They can't wait to get stuck into the requirements definition. And you think, this is wonderful. This is the sort of behavior that I love to see from a stakeholder. So you organize a meeting with the chief marketing officer and their team. And in that meeting, you're expecting the chief marketing officer to whoop and holler and say how great this is. But actually they sit there and they're really, really quiet. And you feel like you've got to do a lot of the work and try and explain why we're doing this project, and you've got to justify the change, and you're looking across going, why are you behaving in a different way? So it doesn't happen every time, but I've quite often seen that type of difference in behavior. And so as an analyst, I'm thinking, what's causing that? And more importantly, how do I navigate that to make sure that I'm getting the right true needs? And so what Michael taught us is that behaviors, problems or changes with behaviors, you can't solve them at the behavior level. You can't just say to someone, behave differently, or force them into behaving differently. What he taught us is that you have to address the problem either above at capabilities or below at environment. And so in the little story that I made up there about the chief marketing officer and their team, it might be that capabilities is what you're able to do. The chief marketing officer might have been told, you know, you can't rock the boat with your team. We haven't announced certain changes yet, so you're not able to talk about stuff. So they don't have the ability to be able to talk about the thing that they could talk to us about one-to-one. So what we've got to be careful of with stakeholder engagement is that we don't break any of those confidences. So sometimes it can be useful for us to say, look, I noticed you behave slightly differently in the one-to-one interview and the meeting. Didn't want to say anything at the time, but just interested to know, were you not able to say anything there? Yeah. Yes, I'm calling my timing, so that's good. Yeah, we'll do another couple of minutes on this one, and then I'll throw it open. I'm quite happy to stay a wee bit longer if that's okay with people, but we'll get through the full Q&A first. So if you can't solve it with capability, it might be the environment. So the team meeting and the one-to-one, people behave differently. So let's say you hadn't interviewed the chief marketing officer, but you first met them in the group session, and someone said, oh, they were a bit quiet. That might give you a clue that it was the environment that was making them quiet. Now, sometimes it can be some like political or priorities. Other times it can be that in a group environment, so I have problems with my hearing. So in a group environment, I can sometimes struggle. So that's an environmental thing that we have no real control over. But as an analyst, you can still change what you do by changing the environment. You can take someone into a one-to-one meeting, for example. Last little thing on this one, the egg model on the right-hand side, believe, behave, become. Our behaviours are driven by our beliefs and values. So if you're seeing behaviours that you didn't expect, that can give you a clue as to say, what is someone valuing about this? So if someone is reacting negatively to something that you thought they might react positively to, maybe you can say to them, so I think that what we're trying to do is get this value, but do tell me if you think that we'll get value from something else instead. And then that gives them an opportunity to tell you what they believe, all about people again. So that's our top two. As we've only got 5 of the minutes left for all of us who are in here, let's do some Q&A, and then I can stay around a wee bit longer if we want to go through the other priorities, but certainly respect the fact that a lot of you may need to finish at 9, so let's aim for that. So I'm going to flick away to my Q&A slide and throw the floor open for thoughts or questions. I'm keeping an eye on the chat box as well, by the way. Fantastic, thank you. Right, so from a stakeholder management perspective, what are the biggest differences being an internal BA and an external BA? Thank you. Oh, what a great question. Yeah, that's really good. Let me think of that one. So as an external BA, sometimes you have a bit more freedom and license to ask the hard questions. Because you're being brought in as an outsider to bring that that third viewpoint, that external experience, and to ask the hard questions. As an internal BA, it's a bit like we don't want to bite the hand that feeds us, to think metaphorically, and yet we're still expected to tell the truth. So I think it can be slightly more tricky or nuanced to be an internal BA. And so I think this probably relates to the second question as well. With being an internal BA, I think it's really important that people trust you to represent them well. And so maybe the sorts of things that you might need to do more as an internal BA is ask people what they feel comfortable sharing, what they don't feel comfortable sharing maybe. Or it could be to ask some of the easier questions to begin with, and to demonstrate that you've listened and represented people and not broken confidences or told tales. But maybe if you need to break some challenging news or to ask some challenging questions, do it with the person there and say, look, I think that we need to explore this. Are you comfortable with me approaching it in this way, asking these sorts of questions, or having a meeting, or could we bring that person in and involve people in the conversation? So hopefully that's gives some insights into that. Build trust with stakeholders. I guess it comes down to make clear promises and keep them. Why are we in this interview? Why are we in this meeting? Because I need to understand what you need. And we may need to talk about the difference between need and want, and therefore, what do you need from me, and how do I demonstrate that? Never underestimate the power of saying to someone, "What does good look like to you?" Office dynamics in a new environment. I mean, it's an interesting question. I guess it's so dependent on the environment. So if we think about that triangle there. The environment is almost like the base layer. It's the foundation that everything's built upon. So perhaps the way to navigate the environment is to look at who's behaving what way. And so almost if you start your personas or your little pen portraits of people and what behaviors you're seeing, maybe try and see if there are patterns that relate to the office environment. And what that might do is give you some clues as to what's driving those different behaviors. And so at least it gives you some conversations to have or some assumptions to validate. Great. Sorry, Carol, go for it.
Sorry. No, don't mean to.
Well, that's okay. No, it just you popped up and I thought, oh. No problem. So when you try to find out what stakeholders really need and they might not know well themselves, how do we know if we already get to the bottom of the quest? So when do we stop, basically? When do we know we've got to need versus want? Yeah. I mean, this is where we go from, I guess, the science into the art of being an analyst. And to some extent, I suppose it depends on what level of work we're doing. Are we talking about business cases? Are we talking about business requirements, functional requirements, technical requirements, and so on? So there will be some sort of model that helps us work out, have we at least got down to the right level and don't go too much further? That's a great question. Actually, it's really making me think. I suppose the sort of thing that I would tend to do is to take a little bit of a step back and say to people, let's run some scenarios through this. Let's test our thinking here. So if you've told me what you think we need and we've recorded that, let's play some things that happen right now through this model and see how it feels. Do we feel like we've got any gaps? And then let's think about what good would look like when we've finished this work, and let's try and run some of those scenarios through, and then look for gaps there, look for questions that remain unanswered. So that would probably be the first thing that I would do there. Key metrics, or some of the client signals you focus to know you're successfully engaging stakeholders. Well, I like that one. So sometimes it's about reading the body language if you can. So are people leaning into you? Are they listening? Can you see them taking notes? So all those classic signals. Do they take your calls when you ask for invites for interviews and things? I think a good sign that you've engaged the stakeholder is that they take the time to think. I think if you're working with a stakeholder and they just say everything really quickly and smoothly, you're kind of getting their thought through party line. I think if you stop someone in their tracks and make them think, then that's a really good sign that you've got stakeholder engagement. And again, never forget that you can always say to someone, is this engaging for you? Is this working? I used the Roman voting thing with the thumb up for good, the thumb down for not good, and the thumb in the middle for not sure. That works really well, even with one person in front of you, just to say, how are you feeling? Because it's quite non-committal, but it gives you clues as to how well you're doing. So don't be afraid of saying, how is this for you? Are you getting what you need out of it? From your experience, how to deal with stakeholders' conflict who have different priorities. Yeah, so the Crucial Conversations was one of the books that I was going to talk about. So let me, I wonder whether I can flick onto that and not destroy the poll. I'm flying blind here, so hope I don't ruin it. There we go. Crucial Conversations, again, quite an old book now, but even nowadays, if I'm going to go into a difficult situation, I will read the first few chapters of Crucial Conversations again and just remind myself of it. And so the reason for that is that what the authors mean by crucial conversation is it's emotional, it's high stakes, and people think different things, their opinions differ. And so the practicalities of this is that what you do essentially is you draw a circle on the whiteboard and you get people to put all the things that matter to them on Post-its, all their priorities on the board, and then you try and cluster common ones inside the circle. And we call that the pool of shared meaning. And it's a bit of a tool that helps people see that even when we think we're coming from completely different standpoints, there's usually something that binds us together that's a common thing. And so from that, you can begin to really unpack the big priorities. So that's quite if it's an emotional priority sort of thing. I think the question was a bit more general purpose than that, wasn't it? Let me just get back to it. Yeah, so another thing that I think works really well with prioritization is the four-box model, like a Boston matrix. So that's where you have two axes, one that way and one that way, and you make people put them into either A or B, A or B, because it forces people to think about whether something is binary, one thing or another. And the reason that I like that for prioritization is that often when we try to prioritize, we tend to go with a ranked list, and we go top priority, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth. But a lot of the time, our priorities are not competing, but they're at right angles to one another. And so that if you're finding that you're trying to make one continuum, one measurement for a priority, and it's not satisfying people, try breaking it into two axes. Stories of turning around a tricky stakeholder. Yeah, that's my job. Yeah, and stories. Those are the jobs that I enjoy most, actually, are the ones where someone is a bit cynical or skeptical about, me personally or us as a business or profession coming in. And they often have good reason for that. And I try and understand their story and find out what it is that really matters to them, and try and support them and not threaten them. So I've had this a few times with different roles, maybe an enterprise architect or a chief finance officer. In fact, that's probably a story I would pick on recently, where the CFO signed off a project that we're working on, which was going really, really well for the people on the ground, and the CFO didn't quite click with what we were doing and the way we were doing it. And so it got to a point where he said, look, I really want to understand before we go too much further what, I'm trusting you, but I'm not getting it. And so that was wonderful that he felt he could say that. And, he still wanted me to make sure that he got it in his worldview, in his language. So I was actually really pleased that I'd built the relationship with him so that he trusted us to work forward as a team. And he was honest enough to say, I need to understand more now. And so when we got the opportunity to talk, I could listen to how he was putting it. It made me realize where the misunderstanding was, or where the gap was. And it all came down to visual format. So I was using one visual format to tell a story one way, and he was expecting a different visual format. And so just by saying, oh, so if I took this and drew it like that, would that make you happy? He said, yes, that's what I want to see. So that's the power of asking people what good looks like. These are great questions, folks. Fantastic. How do we feel? Do we want to hang around a few more minutes? Or, to be honest, all the information is in the slides in terms of the book recommendations and some of the key points. So you can always drop me a LinkedIn message or email me.
Yeah, I think we're quite happy to extend the meeting for a little bit longer. For anyone who cannot stay longer, we will have the recording shared in our YouTube channel later. For anyone still keen to listen the rest of the slides, and they're really, really valuable, insightful, and welcome to stay on. Is that okay, Kate?
Yes, we'll limit it to no more than 3 hours. That's a joke. Yeah, maybe another 5-10 minutes then. Yeah. Fantastic. Thanks everyone for that. So we covered off behavior, didn't we? So let's go back to impact. So what I'm doing just now is I'm just going back through the other priorities. Hopefully that will suit everyone. Awesome, thank you. Yeah, I think we're one more back, or is it two? Oh, three actually, crikey. So next one, yeah.
Sorry.
No, it'll actually be this one was impact, I think was the next one, wasn't it? There we go, impact players, right. So the book here is called Impact Players, and it's all about some research that was done by Liz Wiseman and her team. And they spoke to hundreds of businesses, mostly in the US, but around the world, and said, they tried to distill what it was that made those star performers who they were. These people who are impact players. So the term comes from sport, where you bring your substitutes off the bench, not because someone's been injured, but because you want them to really play hard in the last 15 or 20 minutes and make a real difference. And they make an impact when they come on the field. And so Liz Wiseman spotted that there were analogies for this in business. And so she set out to research what the common factors were with people. So build a persona really of an impact player. And so these were the 5 rules that she came up with. And so I try to live by these values as well. And I think if you can do this successfully, you can really have a big impact on the work that you're doing. You can take action, that gets really, really good results. It is hard work. You can't be an impact player all the time. This is something that you step up and then step back. You step up and you take on something that you have never done before, maybe, or a responsibility that's actually above your pay grade, but you do it because it needs to be done. So maybe a document needs to be talked through with the chief exec, and you think, well, I'm just the BA on this, but I know it better than everyone else. So do you know what? I'm going to book a meeting with the chief exec, and I'm going to say, hope you don't mind, I'd love to walk you through this and explain it in my words and get your view. So you've stepped up, you do the thing, everyone's happy, you can then step back and breathe a sigh of relief and be yourself again. So that's what we mean by step up and step back. It's also a bit of doing the job that's needed. Someone needed to talk the CEO through this. So you did point number 1 there as well. Finish stronger. So solutions was I think the biggest word that we had on the word cloud. So this is the finish stronger means get to the solution. Don't just say it's someone else's problem to deal with, but think of what you can do to fix the situation or to solve the problem. 4th bullet is about remaining adaptable. So quite often, I find with the work that I do as an analyst and consultant, I go into an interview or even a workshop sometimes with an idea of how it will run and an agenda even, and I find out that on the day it's not going to work. A lot of the time my workshops tend to be in quite high level or ambiguous situations. That's not always the case, depending on what type of analysis you're doing, but for me this is quite a usual thing, is to have to adapt on the fly. And so that's, instead of me going, oh, well, obviously this is not going to be the right agenda, I'll just have to deal with it and, we'll get something out of it. You stop and you say, right, how can I change the thing that I've got to do today? I mean, a really trivial example is this slide deck where I've put the slides in the order that I came up with them, but we did the Slido poll so that I could do them in a different order, like a super simple version of adapting. And for some people, if you like practicing and rehearsing a presentation all the way through, that can really throw you. When someone says, I like what you're saying, Keith, can you go back 3 slides and talk about that and then go off sideways to this thing that I want you to talk about? That can happen quite a lot. And so, just be ready for that and think, what would happen if I had to deal with this? How do I step back into my presentation? How do I give myself the space and the permission to have a think and talk about this new thing? So sometimes ask and adjust is not just saying, yes, of course I'll talk about whatever you want me to talk about, but saying, okay, I'd planned to talk about this for this reason. Out of interest, why is it that now you want me to go off to the side? So that's the ask part. And if they say, well, it's on my mind right now, you say, well, why don't we write it in the parking lot? And we'll do that at the end. So they're all, ask and adjust means all sorts of things, but it's just about kind of being in the moment and giving yourself the time to plan how you'll react to things. And then make work light. What's the difference in our workplaces or in our schools or colleges where someone comes in and they go, oh, we've got to do this thing and it's so hard and it's just so much detail, we've got to do so much reading and things, versus someone who comes in and goes, oh, well, new assignment, we're going to learn a lot on this one. And that kind of attitude of, it's not about diminishing the importance of work. It's just about saying, okay, we've got to do this. It's what we're here for. Let's make it work. How can we help one another? It's that lightness rather than lightheartedness. So if you can do all 5 of these things, what will end up happening is people will keep coming to you because they know that you create an impact. They'll trust you. And instead of you having to chase appointments with them for requirements interviews and things, they'll start phoning you or emailing you saying, I'd like to talk this through with you. Could you spare me half an hour? And so you get this reputation as someone who can explore and help and analyze and bring that clarity and confidence that we talked about earlier. So quite a good set of rules there. So from rules onto ambiguity. How are we doing? Another 5 minutes? So situational awareness is how we might deal with ambiguity. We've got a hand up there, haven't we? Did someone want to ask a question or say something? I've only got initials, TG. No, all good. So situational awareness, a few of my friends are in things like emergency services, and so quite often they're either dealing with quite heavy demand situations, or it's not completely clear the situation they're in and what they need to do about it. They're in an emergency situation, and of course in New Zealand we've just had a fair bit of that with the cyclone that hit us recently. So the big picture down here on the lower right-hand corner is the full model from Wikipedia. It's quite a good article actually on this. But there's a simpler version that I try and use, which is over here on the left-hand side, which is this observe, interpret, project, decide, and act. So what it's basically saying is, what am I seeing and sensing here? What are my facts of the matter here? So I'm in a workshop with this particular team, and I'm seeing half the people are on the phones, half the people are looking at me, and the leader is looking outside the window. That's my observations. Now, my interpretation of that might be that the people on the phones are bored, or they might be taking notes, or they might be Googling the stuff that I'm talking about. So those are possible interpretations. The leader looking out of the window might be thinking very deep thoughts, or they might be thinking what they're having for their tea tonight. And what was my third group? I've forgotten now. So that was the people who I think were listening to what I was saying. So they're kind of leaning into it. So it might be that they are really interested in what I've got to say, or it might be that they are concerned that their boss thinks that they are working hard. So those are all possible interpretations. So what I then do is I project. I say what might then happen or what I might be looking at. So one of my projections is that the whole meeting falls apart because no one cares. Another projection might be that everyone's so interested that I need to capture this moment. So those are my 2 projections. My decision is, I don't know which one of those is real. So the action that I pick is to say to people, can I just take a quick rain check? How's everyone finding this? Are you interested, or are you bored and looking at the cricket? And so that's my act. And then people laugh or and they talk to me and they give me more information that I observe. So they say, no, we're loving this, or yeah, you have missed the point a bit, Keith. So that gives me a new set of observations that I can change. And so what I'm really looking to do there is to try and say, what do I know? What are my facts? What are my assumptions? And what are my opinions here? And then try and quickly iterate through those to remove some of the ambiguity and replace some of those assumptions or those opinions with, if not facts, then at least what people are really telling me. So that little 5-step model, which you can just keep cycling round, is quite useful for recognizing ambiguity, because quite often people will give us assumptions as facts. So do we know that to be true, or is that what we think? And so if you do an observe and interpret on those, that can sometimes help you determine what is real and what is assumed. So that actually echoes one of the questions that you asked as well, where how do you know when to stop? You can start to say, well, is this based on facts or assumptions? That's another way to approach that question. I think we've probably covered off some of the stuff on rapport. I'm just looking at the last few here. Active listening. We've definitely covered off diffusing. The last one was the crucial conversations. I would recommend, I'll not go too deeply into active listening, but for me, it's another really important part of us doing what we do, particularly with smaller groups of people. It's showing people that they've been heard. There are ways and tools of having a conversation so that you double check that you've heard correctly. A lot of the time as analysts and consultants, we're trying to build our understanding as we're listening. So we ask a question, I think, people tell us stuff, and we're trying to write it down and understand it at the same time. And so sometimes, I find if I'm tired, I get to the end of someone's answer and I realize that I've been trying to figure out what it was they were meaning, so I haven't been writing it. Whereas actually what I need to do is write it, withhold judgment, the second thing, come back and say, oh, what does that mean? So this is another example, I think, of giving yourself some time to do the two things separately. They do pair up quite nicely. And then once you've done that, it's great to reflect back to the person what you've written down and what you've heard, and to ask for any clarifications. So did you really mean this? A great example to try is try and get one person in your team or one of your colleagues to tell another person some information, and get the second person to play back what they heard to the first person, and find out how accurate that is. Just give that a try and see how good people are at listening to even simple basic information and playing it back, because active listening is actually quite hard. And then the last thing is to make sure that you've got the gist of things, summarize it back. So the 6-line story, for example, is a summary of trying to convince someone to see your point of view. And then don't be secretive. Share it back with people, because that's another part of building rapport and trust. So there we go. That's my very quick blast through of some tools for you. There's links to all of these in the slides. And as I say, if I get to the last slide, you've got my LinkedIn links in the notes there. And I think if we go, yeah. I'll leave you with that one, but pose some questions. You don't need to answer these right now, but it would be great for you to think about them, and let me know what you think over the course of the next week or so. Is there one thing that's resonated with you today that you think that might help me with a challenge I'm facing at work? Or there's one thing that really intrigues me and I'd like to try that. How do you think you might work it? And are there things that you can measure so that you can kind of prove to yourself this is a great thing to do? So lead and lag metrics. And share back with the group, and I'd love to hear whether any of the ideas have been useful to you. Fantastic. So have a think. My QR code again. There we go. There.
Thank you, Kay.
Thank you so much for your attention. I know I've talked a lot longer, but I've loved talking with you this evening. I hope it was useful.
Oh, thank you very much, Kay. So that's so valuable and very insightful. I think especially for people who are transitioning into BA, they might have a rough idea, oh, communication is important, the stakeholder is important. However, we may not have any idea or strategy is how to do this, how to perform in the real situation. That's just really, for me, really eye-opening and very, very insightful. Will definitely prepare me for the future BA role.
Fantastic. Oh, so happy to hear that. Thank you so much. Thank you everyone for your time. Very much appreciated.
So the questions that Kate raised in this slide, we actually already built them into our Google Doc that was shared in the chat box. So we would love to hear your plan, your action, and your reflection, your progress, and also, of course, your feedback for our event as well. Would love to hear you. So yeah, we have the Google Doc sheet, and would love to see your comments there.
Yeah, and Lynn, sorry to cut across you. I would really value your reflections and ideas as well, because it's great to know what I can do to improve as well. So do please be open and honest about what you liked and what you didn't like, what you would have wanted to have seen and what was really valuable. That's awesome as well for me.
One thing for sure, we would like to hear more about these topics. Hopefully in future we can invite you again to do another talk, deep dive into another very useful practical topic.
Fantastic, I'd love that.
Well, thank you everyone for joining us tonight, and we have learned quite a few strategies that are very crucial for business analysts and to navigate the complexities of stakeholder management. And hopefully we will implement those principles, strategies, and skills, and we can build a very effective relationship with our stakeholders and communicate effectively and drive successful outcomes. So yeah, we hope that knowledge and insight shared by Kate will inspire you to apply and in your own job, no matter what role you are or what role you have. So for our audience, yes, please, once again, please leave your feedback. We would love to hear you, and stay tuned with us. We have more speaker events lined up as well. So the very next one will be on the 12th of May. We're going to talk about boosting your requirements, gathering effectiveness with neuro-linguistic programming techniques. Sounds very mouthful. This is something that's relevant to a lot of BA job as well, I think. Yeah, stay tuned with us, and I hope to see you again on the 12th of May. So yeah, please follow us on our career meetup group, and we have videos posted in our YouTube channel as well, including this one will be posted soon too. So we'd love to connect with you through LinkedIn too. Once again, thank you very much, and thank you, Kate, for sharing your insights with us tonight. Thank you all for staying late with us. Thank you, Janelle, for supporting us as a co-host behind the scenes, posting all the links and books links as well. So yeah, see you all next time. Good night, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, guys.
Bye.
Thank you, Keith.
Thank you. Thank you, Kate.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.